This is Grafted Together with ACSI Chief Ministry Officer Jerry Nelson.
So as we truly prepare to ask the hard questions that shape our schools and our souls, are we willing to allow the Holy Spirit to really dig deep and challenge us in areas that may be hard? You know, in this season of ACSI's Vision 2030, the teacher leader pipeline not only calls us to increase our staff, to deepen the level in which our staff executes their responsibility, but it also calls us to increase diversity in our staff so that our campus truly reflect God's kingdom as envisioned in Revelation 7:19. Yet we know that increasing diversity may be a matter of boundaries, geography, access, limited pools. These things often stand in the way. And so one of the things that I'd like for us to begin to think about holistically as an entire association is about strategies that produce real fruit. And how might we expand our reach to diverse candidates and communities, and this is the important thing, without compromising our Christ-centered mission. You know, in economics, scarcity drives costs, and in the military, combat pay acknowledges risk. And so I pose this question: should we consider a faith-informed form of risk and reward for teachers who choose to teach in populations different from their own? If so, what would that look like in a gospel-centered school? Again, this is balancing stewardship, compassion, and practicality while remaining faithful to the gospel message. Not a compromise here. And as we've discussed in previous podcasts, I had Dr. Paige Curley on to share her research on the perspectives of African Americans in particular in working in largely and predominantly white schools in the North Carolina area. And one of the things that she mentioned was the importance of each of those individuals having a deep sense of calling. That's the thing that actually keeps them there. So a question I pose: how can leaders navigate the tension between pursuing a more diverse culture and caring for the least of these while fostering belonging for both staff and students? And then there's beyond schools. There's a growing desire among church and business leaders to align with this mission of bringing Christ-centered education to communities, bridging faith communities with educational excellence. So how can we cultivate partnerships that expand opportunities, honor every voice, and equip the next generation to navigate a world that demands both truth and grace? And so as we explore today these opportunities to think about how we can truly honor the kingdom of God, I want us to allow the Holy Spirit to speak to us as we ask these hard questions. And I'll tell you, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do want to ask the hard questions for us to think about. And I believe asking hard questions is a part of spiritual formation. And spiritual formation is what makes Christian education Christian education. So if you're not a part of the growing spiritual formation network, you are missing out. And so coming up on April 28th, we're going to have Dr. Milton Gonzalez, Executive Director at Covenant Christian Academy in McAllen, Texas, who will walk us through the last phase of our spiritual formation journey map on how to equip teachers and leaders to prepare for and respond to crisis. So to register for the Spiritual Formation Network meeting, you can sign up at acsi.org/convene. That is acsi.org/CONVENE, and look for Spiritual Formation Network. Also, be sure to register for the Rooted Educator Worldview Summit on June 15th through the 17th in partnership with the Colson Center in Colorado Springs, where we will be exploring the theme of biblical anthropology. And you can sign up for the Rooted Worldview Summit at acsi.org/rooted. Joining the podcast today is a good friend of mine and really truly a visionary, a courageous visionary in this space, John Murray, who has over 31 years of experience in Christian education and 23 years as a head of school. John is a thought leader, genuinely, and that's why I brought him on to deal with these heavy topics. When it comes to equipping children and parents to impact modern culture, for Jesus Christ with a BA from Vanderbilt University and an M.A.L.S from Dartmouth College. John has extensive experience in impacting the broader public through speaking, writing, and filmmaking. He currently serves as head of Brookstone Schools, a K through 8 school in Charlotte, North Carolina, whose mission is to glorify God by equipping under-resourced students spiritually, socially, and academically for future lives of leadership and service. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a blessing to be with you today.
So, as I said, man, I bring on the heavy hitters to discuss some of these harder, heavy topics. But you know, how did you get to Brookstone? What was the path that led you there? Share with our listeners a little bit about your journey in Christian education.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I would say if you had told me, 10, 15 years ago, if I would be leading a school like Brookstone, I'm like, I'm not your guy, I have no idea how to lead a school like that. But yeah, I mean, now when I just think back about how God was preparing me, I don't know if you remember the ministry Promise Keepers in the late 90s. I
Hmm.
was invited to go. And one of the things that God really moved in my heart was that one of their goals was racial reconciliation.
Hmm.
And one of the challenges, the one I was at was in 96, was to go to the DC. They were gathering in DC in 1997 and encourage to bring a person of color with you, that just the idea of, racial reconciliation. So little did I know the next year I would be at Whitfield Academy, was part of the founding faculty and administration. I was the dean of
Hmm.
students. And the goal of that school was racial reconciliation, was one of their part of their mission. And so we took a big group of men with fathers and sons, African American, Caucasian, to DC for this Promise Keepers event. And it was one of the most powerful things I've ever experienced. There were probably over 1 million men there,
Wow.
just on the lawn from the Capitol building all the way past the Washington Monument. I have a picture of it on my wall over here. And one of the most powerful moments was when they had us all, I mean, it was, I'm packed in with men, but they had us all get down as we could on our knees and literally on the ground and pray for forgiveness for the sins of our nation, for
Hmm.
slavery, for racism, for Jim Crow. I mean, um, Native American, I mean, you name it. And it was one of the most powerful, holy moments I've ever experienced. I mean, this many men in DC, and it was
Wow.
silent in
Wow.
this moment of prayer. And I just like God just really moved in my heart that, to be a part of racial reconciliation. But honestly, Jerry, I had no idea, what that would look like, and I
Hmm.
thought, well, here I am at Whitfield, and this is a part of what we're doing. And so I saw God using me there. But when he called me to my first school, this was still on my heart. And one of the things I noticed they had at this school when I got there was eventually a K through 12, but they had a slave auction that they did with their seniors where they auctioned off students to be used to raise money. And I'm going, what? Are you kidding me? And there was like an African American student in the senior class. And I just said, we're not doing this. This is crazy.
Mm.
Sorry. This is so tone deaf. And they were
Yeah.
looking at, well, what's the big deal? Oh, yeah, that's not what we mean. I'm like, are you kidding me? And it was just like God just started, open my eyes at these things that were, in the school. And we had never had an African American staff member in the school.
Mm.
And so God helped me hire the first two African American, a male and female teacher that had the courage to come in and be the first. African American teachers, and
Mm.
but it was this guy started me on this journey and of just how I can speak into making the school, reflect if we're trying to grow diversity, right? Reflect our
Yeah.
student population. The next school I led that was had this kind of diversity was my school in DC, Fourth Presbyterian, and it was a different kind of diversity. It was 40% students of color, but these were kids from all over the world.
Yeah.
Because as you
Yeah.
know, DC being kind of the world's capital, right? We had embassy
Uh-huh.
kids, kids whose parents worked at the World Bank. And it was fascinating just to really get to love and understand different cultures. We had an international day where kids could dress up like their home countries, and we had food, different foods that were brought in, and just trying to embrace each other's cultures, not be fearful or think one culture is
Right,
better than
right,
the
right.
other. Um, but the biggest eye-opening experience for me was when I went to my school in St. Louis that was 40% African American.
Hmm.
And I got there a month before the death of Michael Brown, and the city just exploded. And
Hmm.
it's many may remember, and 1/5 of our families were from the Ferguson, Florissant area where the riots were taking place, where Michael Brown had been
Hmm.
killed, and the marches and protests. And one of the first things I was asked by some of the African American parents is like, "You've got to speak into this." I was like, what? I just got here, I'm a white guy. I don't know if I'm your guy. And they're like, no, 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 you got to speak into this. And
Hmm.
I remember it was the next week after this happened, we had our opening ceremony where we had close to 300 students, their parents. We had a big parking deck that we did a prayer time every year.
Hmm.
And where the head of school got up and led the whole school in prayer for the school year. And I remember I prayed for Michael Brown's family, and little did I know how important that was. I just thought that's a natural thing to do, right? They lost their son,
Hmm. Yeah,
the community's grieving, and we
yeah.
need to pray for his family. And we posted that on Facebook, and we had a parent pull their kids from the school the next day.
Yeah.
Saying we were political, and I'm like, what are you talking about? We were a Christian
Mm,
school. This is a huge event in our community. This is dividing our community, and we have families that have been deeply impacted and wounded by this, and
mhm,
we're going to speak into this. And we ended up starting a monthly group called Courageous Conversations, where we would bring up a topic and allow people to come for parents.
mhm,
And it
mhm.
was where this guy just started taking just again the scales off my eyes of just hearing people's stories, getting to know people, men and women of color. It's like, what do you think about Michael Brown? Here's my story. Here's,
Yeah.
I'm not anti-police, but here's my story being pulled over by the police, being thrown on against my car. I've done nothing wrong. I'm, you know, driving while black is what they said.
Mhm.
It's like in the wrong neighborhood. But God just really just started opening my eyes to
Yeah.
realize I have a white lens. I have a white culture, and thinking that, well, there's culture and then there's African American culture, Hispanic culture,
Mhm.
Native American culture. It's like, no, there's white culture too.
Mhm.
And even as things as simple as like our Thanksgiving, in schools celebrate Thanksgiving with their JKers or kindergartners, and they
Mhm.
dress up and they serve what everyone eats, right? Turkey, dressing, cranberry sauce. And one of our parents came to me and said, John, do you know not all people celebrate Thanksgiving that way? I was like, well, what do you mean? Well, for example, we have sweet potato pie, we have mac and cheese,
Yeah.
and I never really see that. And when you have almost half the students in the classroom African American, this is not really reflecting. This is not what the original Pilgrims ate. I mean, they ate like eel. If you go back and read the Plymouth Plantation,
Right. Mhm.
and I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And so
Mhm.
that year, we decided to have families bring what they eat, and it was amazing. I mean, that's people, all the white kids like mac and cheese for Thanksgiving. This is awesome. And I'm not saying
Hopefully it's the baked kind, not the
right,
Velveeta cheese kind. I'm a
right.
little biased when it comes to that. Anyways.
But I mean, and again, I'm not stereotyping like all African Americans eat mac and cheese for Thanksgiving, but it was
Yeah.
just the point was you can't assume that everyone does things
Mm,
the same way. And
yeah.
that we assume this is where, and if I'm honest, predominantly white families that I knew, I mean, I had done this in my schools for years, never thought twice about it. No one ever challenged me on it.
Yeah.
And even things like happy birthday, I remember when I'd hired an African American teacher and the teachers were all coming in, bringing their kids in to sing happy birthday to me. And she brought in her computer and played a song that I'm embarrassed to say I'd never heard before. And it was Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday to You. She had her whole class sing to me. And I was like, wow, that was awesome. I went home that night. I'm sitting at the dinner table with my wife and four kids. And I said, I heard I'm going to play this song to you that they sang to me today. And I said, I wonder if this is if African Americans sing this song. And literally the next week, my daughter's on the bus with her friends going to a track meet. And they started singing happy birthday in that way. And my daughter joined in, and all the African American girls looked at her like, how do you know that song? My dad taught me that song. And so I went back to school, and my daughter's friends who were at my school were in sixth grade, they're all African American. And I came and I said, guys, can I ask you something? I said, when y'all sing happy birthday at your house, how do you sing it? And they're like, oh, Mr. Murray, happy birthday, Stevie Wonder. And I said, would you guys be willing to lead the whole school in that next week? Because we always did birthdays in a Monday morning assembly, and we
Yeah.
sang happy birthday to you, just like what I thought everyone sang, right?
Uh,
So the next week they came up and I said, guys, we have a new way we're going to sing happy birthday. I want to share with y'all. And all the African American kids went crazy and were singing. And a guy who became one of my closest friends in St. Louis was touring the school that day. He came running into the gym. It's like, what is going on? He was African American male, and he said, I knew at that moment this is the school I wanted to be in.
mm,
Because we were trying, what Guy was showing me is, John, to lead a school that's 40% of people of color, in this case, African American, you've got to respect and know both cultures, right?
yeah.
And it's not one culture over the other. It's just respecting and understanding that. And whether it
Hmm.
was our chapel music, or, I mean, there's so many other examples I could give, how we were
Yeah.
teaching history and presenting history. And I did, and I say I was out of ignorance, and I'm embarrassed by that. I didn't know that song Stevie Wonder wrote was to get Martin Luther King's birthday to become a national holiday. It
Mm,
was to gain support and petition because there was being efforts in Congress to block that. And so that
mhm,
actually, it's Happy Birthday to Dr. King. That
mhm,
song was
mhm.
written, he wrote that, and he and Coretta Scott King went around and gathered signatures and eventually it was passed into law. So it has a really cool history. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and so when I came to Brookstone, it was not only understanding race, but it was understanding poverty. And that was
Mm,
my big learning curve because I thought, well, and again, and I say this with all humility, I have a lot to learn. But I was thinking, oh, I get race. I can lead a school like Brookstone because we're 96% students of color,
yeah.
but we're 75% out or below the poverty level. And that was
Yeah.
a whole another learning curve that God humbled me and said, oh, wait, time out, John, you have a lot to learn to lead the school. And
Hmm.
I came during COVID. So it was fall of 2020 during the shutdown that year. Or most schools were shut down. We were obviously open, but all wearing masks. But
Hmm.
just what I learned was about, teaching with poverty in mind and what that looks like, and being a trauma-informed school and what that looks like, and
Hmm.
ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And if a kid, there's a list now of 15. If a kid has experienced two or three adverse childhood experiences, it impacts their brain and how they learn. So if we're not uh, helping kids from come in and check on them and see how they're doing emotionally to start the day, and if a kid's acting out, seeing what's going on in their heart before we discipline them. It was a whole nother approach that we
Yeah.
began training our teachers, and I've just seen God grow us as a school. And now we have 16 different dialects in the school. We have half our
Wow.
kids are African American, the other half are Asian immigrants from Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand. Charlotte has a big Asian immigrant population.
Mm.
Um, so it's been this clash of cultures, but it's been around this idea of we treat all as image bearers, that we're not
Yeah.
fearful of each other's cultures, we embrace them. And we've done that appropriately throughout the school year. And it's been really beautiful. But it was this journey, man. And just God using people like Aaron Layton, who was the diversity director at Westminster in St. Louis, just to speak into
Hmm.
me when I was like, I have no idea how to lead a school like this, especially during a crisis like Michael Brown. And he gave me a book
Hmm.
that was life changing by Tim Keller called Generous Justice. And
Mm.
it was this biblical view of justice, of how to treat the poor, the immigrant, the disenfranchised, um, people of different races, backgrounds. And it is powerful. If you've not
Yeah.
read this, it was life changing for me and gave me a biblical construct of how to approach this as in treating all as equal image bearers of God. And what does that look like? So that's that's my story, and
And you're
how
sticking with it, right?
yeah, right.
I mean, you didn't
But
have a
I've,
choice.
made
Yeah.
a lot of mistakes along the way. Let me just say that
Yeah.
I've made a lot of mistakes, a lot different regrets at different schools of things I would do differently, but just how God in his mercy has used me, a broken vessel, to
Yeah.
try to speak into these issues and learn from men like you and
Hmm.
others who have so much wisdom and have, and I'm still learning, man. So like, again, I haven't arrived, but just trying, understanding that a white male in this space, I have to be wise and godly because I know a lot of young students of color looking at me and how I'm treating them and others. And what's been so cool is how God has grown our faculty and staff to almost 40% staff of
Mm.
color, both in our
Mm.
administration and our teachers. And that's been beautiful too, because it's the
Yeah.
most diverse school I've ever led from a faculty and staff perspective, and just how we learn from each other, and iron sharpens iron, and what a reflection that is to our students.
Yeah. Well, John, as you were telling your story, I think the one word that just really popped in my head was, I think in each of these situations, you've always maintained a posture of humility and just a willingness to learn, a willingness to allow God to shape you, and just as you just demonstrated right now, a willingness to acknowledge, where you've made mistakes and not exhibiting this posture that you've got it all figured out. I mean, when we read scripture, it's absolutely clear these were broken men, and I think that's one of the beautiful things when we read scripture. We can identify with the folks that God had called into hard situations.
Yeah.
This is not a hard comparison, but I'm reading through, doing a deep dive into Kings, and so I'm about through chapter 18. So right at the beginning of Elijah's story, and there was a lot of questioning that Elijah did of God, and
Yeah.
God put him in some hard situation. He asked him to do some very, very hard things, even going to Ahab, even acknowledging that Ahab was a vile individual. I mean, he was just wicked, and the Bible says that Ahab's wicked. And but God said, and this is the passage that jumps out to me. God said to Elijah, Ahab has confessed, and so I'm going to spare him. And Elijah says, "Yeah, I knew you would do that, God." And I can imagine. Just think about us at an Elijah type. It's like, Lord, man, he's so vile. Why are you letting him off the hook? And so you can really feel, the emotion that he would have had in the situation. But I'm sure Elijah would have said, "Yeah, I'm just a broken vessel. God has decided to use me. I'm going to constantly remain in a position of humility." So I want to kind of build off of your story, and there's two lanes, just kind of in our introduction that I want to talk about. I want to talk about just the process that you went through in increasing, or what led to the increasing of the diversity in the staff? So that's one area. The other area you mentioned, and this was a part of your history, is leading those diverse student populations as well, and now kind of these impoverished areas. And so those two things I want to talk about. So let's start with the part related to the increase in your staff. So where was the staff at? You mentioned before it got to the 40%. What did you do strategically to move in that direction?
Yeah, great question. Well, what was really cool, one of the families that I got to know well in Charlotte that led it was the husband led a very historic African American church in St. Louis.
Hmm.
They moved to Charlotte before a couple years before we did, and I connected them with Charlotte Christian, which was really cool. And that's where they ended up putting their daughter.
Hmm.
And now, and one she became got joined their board over time, which was really neat. So when we moved here, I was like, hey, it's so excited to reconnect with them, and said, could y'all help me, share the word about Brookstone into the African American churches? And so it was during COVID again when everyone was doing Zoom. And so he leads the kind of the mother church for the Missionary Baptist
Hmm.
church here um, in Charlotte. And so he got me on a Zoom call with 30 African American pastors in the area. And they told him how they knew me and my heart and the school I led in St. Louis and then Brookstone. And one of the first questions, the one of the pastors asked is, "What's your diversity like on your staff?" And I was like, "Not enough." And I said, "It's one of the reasons I'm on this call because I need your help and spreading the word
Mm,
about Brookstone. We have these openings, and I need your help in spreading the word." And
mhm,
so I think it was networking with the African American churches. I was able to have a call, with AME churches too. I got to speak at um, a another African American church event. Again, only white person there, but getting up and was very nervous, honestly, when I got to speak. But it's like, but they were just very embracing of me and just but sharing this, we need your help. We want to diversify our faculty and
Mhm,
staff and obviously continue to grow our school. I have a good friend who leads at HBCU in South Carolina, who his kid has been in my school in St. Louis as well. He led a
mhm,
HBCU there, and he's about an hour and a half from Charlotte. But I think going to HBCUs, networking there, because we used to do a people of color basically hiring fair that they did at the school and or at the college in St. Louis. And we network at the people of color college fairs. We definitely network at the HBCUs. Johnson C. Smith University is our HBCU here in Charlotte, but there are a number of great HBCUs obviously around the country and around the Southeast. Um, we hosted a group of students from Howard a couple of years ago, and they came in and did this whole history of HBCUs and Howard College to our students, which is really cool. But I think obviously networking with your current staff
mm,
too and their networks of friends and people in their churches. Um, so I think it's multifaceted, right? It's, posting in the normal places, but then really being intentional about going to areas that will help you hopefully penetrate and having people relationships with people who trust you to know that you're trying to create a healthy environment where people can come into and feel welcomed and
mhm.
that they're going to enjoy working there because I think that's important too.
How long did it take for you to kind of see the maturity in those network? Because it's like donor relation.
Yeah.
You don't go and make the big ask on the first. It's usually an introduction, just really trying to understand the heart of the individual, building that relationship. So how long did it take you to begin to see some real maturity or some fruit from what you had did in cultivating those networks?
Well, I would say in my other schools, it was honestly much harder because that was my heart at all the schools I had led was to try to diversify the faculty and staff. I think here I was very blessed to come in knowing some key African American leaders in the community.
Okay.
And I think, and having that trust already there, I think honestly, Jerry, it would have been probably taken a little longer if I had not had that trusting relationship before. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
what I've learned and been told is that, and this is true with anybody, all people, if they got to trust your organization before they recommend it, right? And I just don't
Mm-hmm.
recommend any school to our
That's right.
families after they graduate. I want to make sure I know the school, I trust them, and know that they'll, Lord willing, have a good experience. And I think knowing the pastor and his wife was huge introduction.
Yeah.
And they
Uh-huh.
introduced me to a lot of key leaders and also having people on our staff that were leaders in their church.
Mm.
Even though I think we had 10% or 15% when I got here, there were some key people that when I said, hey, this is my vision, this is my goal, I want us to try to really better reflect our student population, that made a huge difference too.
Is it a fair statement, John, to say that in order for you to be able to tap into, let's talk about your current network of staff members who, African American, Hispanic, whatever, that minority group would be. Is it fair that is it fair to say something along the lines that they will not recommend or give you access to their network if they don't feel a sense of belonging in your school, if they don't feel like they connect? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think because people go to your website and they're going to look at is all your staff white, and they're going to be like, yikes, that's a very that could be challenging. I mean, and not always, right? And you've got to start somewhere. And thankfully, like I said, at my first school, I had two
Mhm.
teachers who were willing to come in, and I told them, you're going to be the first African American hire in the history of the school.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
was a school that was 25 years old
Yeah.
uh, in North Carolina. But so yeah, and I think it takes people that have a heart and a call to this. But again, I think the cool thing is coming and seeing our student population and like, wow, this is amazing in the
Mm.
diversity in our student population. And because we've also, it's been more challenging trying to recruit Asian immigrant um, background, staff, because a lot of our families that came over from Vietnam and Burma or now Myanmar, the parents don't speak English. And so the
Okay.
kids are first generation English
Mhm.
speakers going to college. And so we last year was the first year we hired an Asian immigrant. She was a teacher from Myanmar as a teacher aide, but she, just got out of college. But it was first generation. So that's a little more challenging
Yeah.
as those students grow and hopefully if those that want to come back. The cool thing, and this is the other thing I would say is just recruiting alumni is we have over 60 alumni that work in our summer camp,
Oh,
which is
wow.
amazing. And I've never seen this like this in the other school. And I think part of it is by God's grace, we've been able to build community here because a lot of our
Mhm.
kids, when they go out, they're in a really small minority in their high schools if they go to the private Christian schools here in Charlotte. So when they come back in the summer, I mean, it's like coming home. And that's been a
Mhm.
beautiful thing of God's done organically, and that's grown and really allowed us to stay connected with our alumni. And we've hired several alumni now that are on our staff, which has been really cool
Yeah.
because this is
Yeah.
our 25th year. So we're starting to
Uh-huh.
reap the benefits of that too. So
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to kind of go backwards a little bit. You mentioned about the first African American, and was that the school in St. Louis? Um,
for the teacher, that was my first school I led in Raleigh.
in Raleigh. Okay, okay. Um, and you told him that he would be the first. Just
Or she, yeah.
can you, or she.
Yeah.
So kind of give us a window into that conversation. What I mean, if you don't mind, give us a window into that conversation. What did you tell her to expect? What was her posture in knowing that she was going to be a really breaking new ground? Entering a different environment that may have been different or you know. So
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, again, I just think she was amazing. She was a PE teacher and trainer,
Hmm.
and she helped teach some health classes. And just her heart and willingness. I think she had been in some predominantly white environments before in terms as a student.
Mm.
So I feel like God had prepared her in that way. But when she heard my heart and what my goal was, and sharing that with her, and that, we would obviously support her and want her to feel encouraged and that and loved and a part of our community, and just the need that we've got to start somewhere. Would you be willing
Yeah.
to do that? And just being honest and upfront, but knowing that we're going to support her. I mean, she became one of the most beloved faculty and staff members because, I mean, as our trainer, she was working with all our athletes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was just a beautiful light for Christ. And then we were able to the next year hire our first African American male teacher to teach in the middle school. And
Hmm.
he was married to a white woman. So again, he had had
Hmm.
experience in being a multicultural background. So, and
Right.
probably faced some of the challenges of
Hmm.
having a biracial marriage. But it's just God calling the right people, obviously, who are prepared to step into that, because there are challenges when you're kind
Yeah.
of the trailblazer, honestly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it takes, you know, but we want to let them know you have our support. And what's cool is over time the school has really become much more diverse in faculty and staff and leadership, which has been really neat. But just to be a part of breaking that ground was cool.
Absolutely. I got two questions. I want to keep backing up because I think it's an
Yeah.
important question, just a little bit, and then we'll slingshot forward. But again, we've said you and I have had conversation. I think you and I understand it, and people that really understand the work that you in particular are engaged in, and just the what I've been tasked to help lead and trumpet, if you will, at ACSI, this Revelation 7:9 vision. But for you, what have you seen as the positive effects of a more diverse staff? You've talked about strategies in which you've used, but let's talk about like the positive effects, or you shared your story of how God broke your heart in this area that really spurred you on to greater engagement in this area. But why do this? Not just based on 7 9, we understand that, but what are some real tangible benefits of having a diverse staff?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, well, I'll just tell you from my kids' perspective, when we were in DC, when our number of our kids had our first grade teacher, her name was Dee Dee Wingfield. She's a good friend, and her mom was helped with as kind of a press secretary early on for Dr. King. And so she
Mm,
grew up with Dr. King's kids,
wow.
and just amazing woman, godly woman. She was the first to integrate her Catholic school in Albany, Georgia.
Wow.
And just her sharing, even in first grade, her sharing her life, just the way she did Black History Month, the culture that she exposed them to, hit stories, um, was beautiful. And I think that breaks down the walls, because I think a lot of what I've seen, just honestly in my own experience, is just fear of
Mm,
different cultures and fear of people different from ourselves. And it's just stripping those walls down of seeing each other as equal image bearers of God, and embracing the differences, not being fearful of the differences. And
mm,
so I think when you have teachers who are teaching students of, different race and ethnicity, it's exposing them in a healthy, loving, nurturing way to
mm,
life is done differently by different people, and that's okay. And that's part
yeah.
of God's
Yeah.
beautiful diversity. Is us, is his, as Ephesians 2:10 says, is his masterpieces, right? Created in Christ.
Yeah.
we are God's workmanship in the Greek, his masterpiece, which I love. And that's something I drive home to our students all the time. And it's just so cool how, when the teachers reflect that too, um, I just think it's beautiful. So I think it's a reciprocal. I think when a white teacher is in front of a room of predominantly students of color, understanding their role and just the importance of what they're conveying, and validating their culture, right? But
Hmm.
also demonstrating that, we have a culture too. It's not, like I said earlier, because Tim Keller was really good at saying this, like, hey, white people, we have a culture too, whether we realize it or not. It's not just culture, it's white culture. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that goes the other way for our African American teachers who teach with our Asian immigrant kids and just helping them connect and see.
Hmm.
Because last year was, I think, the best year we've ever done, the Asian History Month, to
Mm.
celebrate our Asian students and their culture and their background. And we had a chapel service where they led the chapel and did these ceremonial dances and songs. They wore their country's clothing that was reflective of and it was half the school. And
Wow.
up front, and it was so powerful because I feel like we've done Black History Month well every year. We
Yeah.
just had our assembly a couple of weeks ago. It was beautiful. And it's so cool to see Asian immigrant kids up helping with this too, right?
Right. Right.
But but I just think that was so powerful for our African American kids to go, wow, because
Yeah.
what I've
Uh-huh.
said is that, look, because I've tried to explain to our Asian kids that, the reason why African American history is so important in our nation, because this is the most persecuted, arguably the most persecuted race in American history, not taken away from Native Americans, because I know they went
Yeah.
through their own persecution, but being enslaved for centuries, generational
Yeah.
challenges and coming out of that. And I said, I got the top history book and used in schools in the 19 teens mentioned two African Americans,
Mm.
Booker T. Washington
Washington.
and George Washington Carver. No mention of
Carver.
Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sir George, all these names that are now household names no one had ever heard of. This is why W.B. Du Bois wrote about them, Booker T.
Yeah.
Washington wrote about them, and why
Uh-huh.
Carter Woodson started what he called
Black
Negro
History
History Week.
History Month. Yep. Uh-huh.
So, but I said, this is so important, guys, because even today, there's still people we're learning about, right? We've been trying to overcome this awful history.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not to say we don't value your culture either, but I just want you to understand the
That's
history of
good.
why this was so important, because they were historically persecuted. Because one of the cool things, Jerry, when we take our eighth graders to DC, I have been so moved by how the Asian immigrant students are moved walking through the African American History Museum of Culture.
Wow.
They're
Wow.
like, we had no idea. I mean, they're just walking through the whole history, go, oh my gosh, this is awful. And they're so
Mm-hmm.
moved and like,
Mm-hmm.
I get it now. I see why this is so important, right? And then when we go to
Mm-hmm.
the Vietnam Memorial and they see the Asian kids, because we have a number of families whose grandparents fought on the side of America in the Vietnam War that came to
Yeah.
Christ. This is a Montagnard community who were the mountain people that supported our troops and
Uh-huh.
who fled the country after the war because of persecution, religious persecution. When they see them crying and opening up saying, my grandparents won't talk about the war, it was horrific,
Mm-hmm.
awful, awful civil war. And I'm able to say, hey, do you realize, guys, Myanmar is going through civil war right now. Vietnam went through civil war that we were a part of, and African Americans historically experienced the horrors of the
Wow.
Civil
That's such a
War.
great connection.
That all three of these three major cultures in our school that have experienced this, but how God has brought us together, hopefully to learn from each other, understand each other.
Yeah.
I shared that last year at the Asian immigrant when we celebrated that month. It was just really powerful to see, look how much we have in common. Now, Sally, that's through brokenness, but how God can use us to help others understand the importance of culture and learning history and valuing people. And again, not being fearful. And to your point, because I put up Revelation 7:9, said this is
Yeah.
our goal here.
Yeah.
This is what heaven's going to look like. And we want it's best we can to do this on earth too.
Right, right. John, that's so good. One of the things that I really see reflected in what you're doing is very much what Jesus has done for us, right? Jesus saw the brokenness and he got in the middle of the mess. He
Yeah.
came and that's why it says in Hebrews that we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with us. We
Yeah.
have a high priest who understands what we've gone through, sinless, pure, as Peter tells us, describes Jesus Christ. But he understands brokenness. He understands abandonment. He understands hurt because he got in the middle of the story. He had every right to stay in heaven. He's the Lord of the universe. He didn't have to save humanity. He didn't have to, but he decided, and he got in the middle of the mess, and he drew us out. And of course, I've just over the years, I've just been impressed with your deep appreciation for history in general, but your desire to want to know the history of the people that are sitting right in front of you, the people, obviously the students, entering into their story, understanding the bigger story that's really shaped their lives. You genuinely see people as image bearers. And I'm thinking, John, we're probably gonna have to do a part two because I do want to talk about I want to dig a little bit deeper into the recruitment side of things, but I want to talk about this whole idea of seeing people as image bearers. So I want to go there right now.
Well, Jerry, can I just say one thing real quick
Yeah,
before I
sure, go
forget?
ahead.
The importance of history is so powerful because when I got to St. Louis, my wife and I, we thought, wow, St. Louis is this cosmopolitan city. Look at this diversity in this Christian school. I've never seen anything like this. We had no idea until after all this stuff happened with Michael Brown when Aaron Layton and these
Mhm.
pastors led this symposium along with Covenant Seminary on the history of St. Louis and the brokenness and seeing a map. Literally, you could draw a line down the middle. It was black, white. And where we
Mm.
sat was dead center of this
Wow.
dividing line in St. Louis. St. Louis proper, the city of St. Louis, predominantly African American, what was called West County, St. Louis County, predominantly white. And just learning about the history and brokenness and how, things became so segregated was so eye-opening. And so I was like, wow, if I had known that, I would have had a better understanding coming in, realizing
Yeah.
it's not what it seems. And so before I came to Charlotte, that was one of the things I spent a lot of time researching
Hmm.
the racial history of Charlotte and the brokenness, because there was a lot of brokenness here too, as you can imagine, and not coming in, trying to come in as much as I could, eyes wide open. So I just think that's
Yeah.
important as leaders that we know, particularly if we're trying to shepherd our students of color to knowing the history of our communities and where some of the brokenness has been. And if you're coming in new as a head of school, really trying to learn that, it's important.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. So, we're still going to do a part two, I imagine, but let's kind of go
Yeah,
there before we go to the image bearers part. So I did pose the question at the beginning of whether, African Americans or, Asian Americans or Hispanics who are entering into an environment that's different than theirs. Um, and I gave the analogy at the beginning. We were talking right before we launched the podcast that in the world of economics, scarcity kind of drives drives cost. We
yeah,
understand that it's a supply and demand. And one of the things that I've heard from school leaders is, man, it's hard to recruit them. And you obviously provided some strategies on what we there needs to be some proactive networking that goes on, right? You got to get aggressive with it, and you can't expect fruit right away, but you take the win where you can and continue to build upon that. And I'm trying to ask this question as objectively as I possibly can.
sure.
Again, just framing a little bit more, what's happening in the NBA is everyone's tanking because the draft class is supposed to be really, really stacked. And the reason that a lot of these NBA teams go into tanking is they know if they get that generational talent, there's a scarcity. Not every single class, not every single player is going to make a huge impact on a team. But in the case of the Golden State Warriors, they purchased the current ownership purchased the it for 195 million dollars, and I think the valuation of the Golden State Warriors now is somewhere between 7 and 11 billion dollars. So they would multiple X that. And we know that one of those generational talents is none other than Steph Curry. And the Steph Curry brand has
From
grown up.
Charlotte.
So he's from Charlotte. There you go. I was trying to make that connection there.
Yeah, Charlotte Christian.
So I know this is controversial. And really what I'm asking is, is if minority teachers are scarce, especially in how our Christian schools are set up now, should they get a little bit more? Should they be paid a little bit more? Again, knowing it's controversial, I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but I want to know your thoughts on that, John.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think there are times where I've had to pay a little more to bring on some African American teachers, and partly because that's a priority, but partly because they're coming from public schools where they're paid more, right?
Mm,
Um, and so one of my goals in all my schools is, and I've had the privilege of being able to do this and um, for the five schools I've led, is pay 100% what the the public schools are paying.
gotcha.
And so I'm being fair to all teachers.
Mm,
Um, because what I don't want to do is create a divide where people,
right.
even white people feel like they're being um discriminated against, so they're
Hmm.
not being paid equally. But I think what I learned, Jerry, is that if I'm going to recruit strong African American teachers, I need to be willing to pay what the public schools pay
Mm,
and offer benefits. And that's been a game changer. And
yeah.
I think because a lot of Christian schools, for whatever reason, may operate at 80% of the public schools or maybe 90%, which um, and I think the schools where my board has blessed me to go out and recruit at 100%, which makes for more fundraising,
Yeah.
or maybe if depending on the tuition level, um, is really how you recruit and retain the best teachers of color, across the board. And I just think that is something that's been very important to me as a leader and just something I feel like God has called me to. And I know people may watch this podcast say, well, that's great, John. We can't do that. But I just think it's something to really pray about because what, I just struggle with mediocrity and just,
Hmm.
I've always struggled with people saying, well, this is mission work. I'm like, would you tell a Christian doctor that or a lawyer to take a
Hmm.
pay cut because it's mission work? And, this is front lines ministry, no doubt. But I think
Yeah.
scripture says, people are worth the wage. And I think the work
Yeah.
that teachers do, I think if we can pay what the public schools are paying, I think it sends a strong message that we're committed to this. And we have to raise a lot of money here. So
Hmm.
I mean, this year, we're operating at 21,400 per student. The average student, the family here pays $107 a month.
Hmm.
So we're raising this year 3.4 million to cover
Yeah.
the difference. I mean, the
Yeah.
Opportunity Scholarship in North Carolina is great,
Hmm.
but that covers about 25% of our budget. We have to go out tuition's 5%. So again, reverse model in my previous schools,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're fundraising 70% of our budget. But I've seen God's faithfulness and it's hard work. It can be stressful at times.
Yeah.
But it's a
Hmm.
commitment, and I think it's a commitment to all our teachers, but particularly our African American. If we want you here, we want to pay you well. But I've seen us be able to recruit and retain a really amazing faculty, and we've been really blessed by that.
I really appreciate what you said, John, and how you framed it. And I know I wasn't trying to set you up or anybody up. It's just It's a question that does come up, and I think that, at least from what I know of folks that work in public education here in South Florida, and we had the same challenge, right? Um, you want great teachers, but when you know a community is really trying to get ahead economically, it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard to go to them. And not that it won't happen on occasion. It depends on what God is working in their heart or how God is working in their heart. But it's hard to go to them and say, hey, listen, come and work for us. But yeah, we only can pay you 80%. And they kind of look at you as like, a part of what I feel like God has called me to do, especially your African American male teachers. And I think those are some
Absolutely.
of the hardest, especially if they are the ones that are the breadwinners of their families. They love education, they feel called to education, but my experience is many of them are trying to move up to administration because that's where they're really going to be able to provide for their family. It doesn't make them less spiritual or a lack of faith, because I know many many who love Jesus deeply, but they have such a strong commitment to providing for their family. So I think your perspective is important, and the strategies that you've put in place are noteworthy as it relates to taking care of people of color, and trying to recruit them effectively. So, John, man, before you get out of here, man, this is a great conversation, and yes, we are going to do a part two, because I definitely want to dive into a little bit more. And you alluded to, and you gave some strategies on what it means to lead both a diverse uh, population, culturally, ethnically, but also an organization, I mean, a school population that I think you believe you said 70% below the poverty line. So
Yeah,
that's a
75%.
thing,
Yeah.
yeah. But can you give us an update on your work related to Image of God? And you've done some yeoman's work in this area, and obviously you're being able to put a lot of those principles into practice as a head of school. But can you go ahead and give us an update on what's going on in that area?
Sure. Well, um, about probably, I guess it's almost 8 years ago now, I was able to receive a grant to write a curriculum called In Whose Image. And it was this idea of image bearers of God versus the image makers of our time. And just looking at how we approach this. And this was with Gen Z. I was able to commission the Barna Group to do a
Mm,
study. And a lot of the questions I've been asking my classes over the years, to put meat on the bones of just no longer anecdotal, but just seeing what students said all over the country of addressing questions on race and gender and body image and social media, how we navigate these things, Christians as well as non-Christians. And which was a beautiful work. And I've was able to produce 40 videos to go with this, and a number of schools pilot it and use it around the country. But what I'm in the process of doing now is updating it for Gen Alpha,
mm,
because next year will be in our school and schools across the country, you know, through eighth grade will be the first time, K through eighth will be all Gen Alpha, born from
mm,
2013 to the present. And here's what I would say to you, to this audience. It's the most racially diverse generation in US history. They've never
mm.
known a world without 24/7 access to social media. And so I've been praying how best to teach these students. But I think as Christian schools, we need to be aware of, hopefully we are trying to diversify our schools biblically, right? But even
Yeah.
from social, economically, if we are not creating an environment where students of color feel welcome to come, it's going to start hurting Christian schools, because as our country becomes more diverse, this is the first generation where white students are the majority minority, right?
Hmm.
Um, so these are all things to be thinking about it. And even if we're not as diverse as we want to be, if we're truly preparing our students, our white students, to go out into a diverse world, they've got to know how to speak into these issues, lead in these issues, to get along with people from different backgrounds, which I think is so important. So
Yeah.
I've been looking at this and, still looking at the challenges of social media, but now with AI, obviously it's a game changer. And how does this impact us again, this idea of image bearer of God? Because obviously, we all possess a spiritual nature that AI can never comprehend, right?
That's
As image
exactly right.
bearers. Um, and I'm not anti AI, by the way. I'm just thinking what's these principles that are unchanging regardless of
That's
technology
right.
changing. Wisdom, knowing that AI's goal isn't truth seeking, right?
Yeah.
Especially as it pertains to matters of faith and morality, and
Hmm.
grounding our kids in this biblical worldview. Creativity again. AI cannot do things a spirit-filled, spirit-inspired
So
person can
good. Yeah.
do.
Uh-huh.
As an image bearer, right? That's one of the things I loved about Tolkien. He credited his ability to create Middle Earth because he said he was a sub-creator of the creator God, the Father Almighty.
Yes, that's right.
Um, and the last piece is socially, that we are created for a healthy human community,
Yes.
not distracted, dehumanizing worlds that permeate social media and AI and make us very
Hmm.
self-focused, that cause struggles with body dysmorphia, all these challenges. And now it's with deep fakes and hallucinations and all, I was just reading this thing about, I'm sure people have read about the self-harm that's come out of people using AI chatbots as counselors um, and just the generative AI that's still in the works that can be very harmful for kids going to
Right.
seek help, that
Hmm.
we need to be in human community, healthy community and what that looks like. And I think as schools, we have a chance to really model that. So that's been what's been on my heart and really writing and speaking to this.
That's good, John. And I think the takeaway from uh, what I've heard you say in that last explanation of the work and updates. So I appreciate the update. So look out for John's work. We're going to continue to pray that it be transformative. But I would sum this up, and what I'm hearing is why the pursuit of diversity. I would say number one, because we have a picture of it in heaven. We're living between the time or the epoch of redemption and restoration. And so we have an opportunity to practice the body of believers have an opportunity to practice what things are going to be like in heaven, right? So that's one
Yeah.
part. It gives us an opportunity to demonstrate the unity that is can only the true unity that can be only found in Jesus Christ when people from diverse backgrounds breaks down those walls of hostility and they unite together, not erasing the culture, but celebrating all the goodness and the richness, right, that comes from each person culture, while at the same time seeing them genuinely as an image bearer. And then I would say the third thing that I'm taking away as a conclusion is, Paul says in Corinthians that we are ambassadors of Christ, ministers of reconciliation. I think John, and I didn't have this in my notes anywhere. It's just kind of I think what the Spirit's bringing to my mind. You're an example of that. That God called you to be a reconciler. You understood the ministry of reconciliation that God was bringing you, calling you into, not feeling equipped at all, but knowing that God had called you into that space. And again, there's many different types of reconcilers. People who go into marriage, people who go into a marriage ministry or prison ministry, or folks who go into they go on the mission field and battling all types of demonic oppression in those particular they are reconcilers too, but God has called you to the space of racial reconciliation. And so how are we preparing our students for a diverse world? And just as you described for to us, that this is going to be the first generation alpha, where all they know is diversity because they have access to social media. So those three things: the picture of the heaven, Revelation 7, 9, an opportunity to foreshadow, if we will, this restoration, but an opportunity to prepare our students to engage the world for Christ's sake. John, I'm going to give you the last word. Any words of encouragement, any final words the Lord has laid on your heart to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I just think, my wife and I have been going through the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, and it's just so humbling again, just to think, like I said, there are times in my life in schools I've led where I've not done a good job on peacemaking, where I've not,
Mhm.
I could treat people better as image bearers. And I've learned, again, the hard way. And I feel like I'm thankful that we serve a God who is a God of second chances and third chances,
Amen.
um, and who can use our brokenness for good. And I think as I look back on my career and to see the ways that God has broken me and taught me and humbled me, and to see me be able to use that here, hopefully, to so people learn from my mistakes, but also that we can lead in a way that's collaborative, that lead, and I call it leading with a limp, right? That
Hmm.
famous book by Dan Allender that I
Don't
embody, man. That's me.
don't
Leading
don't
with a
trust the person
limp.
who doesn't have a limp.
Yes, but just to embrace that, I think for years I just struggle with self forgiveness because I feel like I really blew
Mm,
it here. And I think about just some things I did in my school in California that I would love a redo, that um, just going in thinking I know what I'm doing and bypassing the relationships of getting to know the
mm,
community. And God just teach me, no, that's not how we do things. That's not treating people as image bearers, and
yeah,
learning what true peacemaking looks like. Not peace
absolutely.
faking,
Peace faking.
but
I
peace
like that one.
making.
I hadn't heard of that one, but I'm going to use that one. Peace
Yeah.
faking. Yeah, that's quotable.
Yeah. But anyway, I just think, God, works through broken people, right? And
Hmm.
I just am thankful that he continues to use me and to be a part of his work and join him in his work. Because I think for the longest time, it's like, Lord, I'm going to do your work for you, and just God
Hmm.
saying, no, that's not how it works. But now saying, God, I want to join you in your work. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, that's a good word, John. Really appreciate you. Please reach out to John if you have questions about anything that we talked about today. John is a wealth of knowledge. One thing that we didn't get into deeply, but hopefully our listeners were able to experience today. John is a historian par excellence. He knows his history very well. So, John, thank you for joining the podcast. Part
thank you.
two coming soon.
All right. God bless you, man. Thank you. Thank you for all the
All
work you're
right.
doing too. You're doing an amazing job at ACSI.
Uh,
They're blessed
well,
to have you.
God's well, God's using a broken vessel to do His work. Thank you, John. Take care.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.